you can catch me in my bed. If I'm not sleeping, it's 'cause I have the blues. So then I take the train and I'll be chillin' with my crew, so I smile.
This shit going down, but I'm new. This trip might look like this is me. Your eyes ain't on my head. Baby, we about to have a life.
Baby, sit calm down in here. I know this trip might look insane. Close your eyes and hold my hand. Baby, I got you. After school, reggae cam with my friend Jane. Made no homework but planned the life we live today. I know sometimes I'm weak, I fall back in my old ways. But luckily I'm blessed, got my soul, my art, my faith. I got dreams, fine wine and cigarettes. If I'm not hustling, you can catch me in my bed. If I'm not sleeping, I got shit to do. So then I take a plane and I'll be flying with my crew, so I'll shine.
This shit going down, but I'm new. This trip might look like this is me. Your eyes ain't on my head. Baby, we about to have a life.
Baby, sit calm down in here. I know this trip might look insane. Close your eyes and hold my hand. Baby, I got you.
Soms hoog, soms laag, soms tussen, maar altijd recht uit. De flow die komt, die gaat en druppelt eruit. Van de bodem mezelf gedragen, ook al kon ik niet altijd mezelf gedragen. Uit het ogen met alle niet water, mijn droom op een schip, hoor geen plannen niet water. Mijn soul is soms de blues, soms zien de ware net als jazz. Soms fresh net als de Prince, money mijn sidekick, jazz. Van de bodem mezelf gedragen, ook al kon ik niet altijd mezelf gedragen. Laat me even mijn schouders ophalen, want baby ik moet nog pas cijfers ophalen. Jazz. Baby you know, you know, you know I got you. Maar eerst heb ik mijn dromen van de go.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you please to take your seats and welcome to the stage Mr. James O'Brien. I've never had a theme tune before. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was lovely. Hello, good evening, and welcome to the third annual Sergei Magnitsky Human Rights Awards. I must begin, for the politicians and the journalists in the room, I must begin by telling you that I've just received confirmation from my third impeccable source that May's resignation is now pretty much a done deal. I refer, of course, to Paul May, the CEO of Patisserie Valerie, who has fallen on his sword this evening as a result of the accountancy scandal that's recently engulfed that cake-based company. When you present a radio talk show, you have very little control over who might phone in next. I remember very fondly a lady who rang us to insist that she had a cure for cancer that she was currently keeping in her fridge and couldn't go public with for fear of the Freemasons. There was another woman who rang a quiz that we conducted once to answer the question, how many kings of England have been called Henry? And she said, well, I know there was Henry VIII, James, and I know there was Henry V. Is it 3? And then there was the day in 2013 when my producer Michael, who is my ex-producer Michael, who is here this evening, told me that he'd taken a call from a chap who'd heard a conversation we'd been conducting on the programme about events in Ukraine and, of course, by association, Russia. And Michael said to me, he's got an astonishing story of torture, murder, the theft of hundreds of millions of dollars, and obviously my eyebrows raised slightly and my skepticism gene kicked in, and I said, oh, okay, mate, yes. And who does this chap say is responsible for this catalogue of crime and malfeasance? And Michael said, Vladimir Putin. And I said, are we sure about this? And Michael said, well, I really think you should meet him. And that is how I came to meet Bill Browder. And when he came into the studio that day, after we'd established that his tale tragically was true, he told me a story that I have never and will never forget. It was also a story which 5 years later, I can tell you, has acted almost as a Rosetta Stone for explaining and aiding understanding of the shifting tectonic plates of international relations and the obsession that the kleptocracy currently in the Kremlin has with both destabilizing liberal democracy and, most importantly, of course, for the king kleptocrat hanging on to his ill-gotten gains. And almost as every year has passed, the story Bill told me that day and the explanation he provided of why what was happening has become, frankly, more and more irresistible. But none of us had heard of him 5 years ago. And that was a thought that occurred to me after the attempt on the lives of Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury earlier this year, because I was live on the radio at the time, and I looked up and I have the television screens of all the major news channels and broadcasters in front of me in the studio, and Bill's face, it's a very nice face, Bill, this is not a complaint. Bill's face at some point during that morning was on every single one of them. And that, I think, is a mark of how in just 5 years he has moved from being a man possessed of determination and resource to a man who has put the frighteners upon the most dangerous and evil individual to lead a country in what is now close to living memory. And there was further proof of that simple fact just 2 days ago when he found himself in Holland explaining to the Dutch Parliament why, although he was delighted to see the sanctions that ordinarily appear under the umbrella of a Magnitsky Act, many places in the world already done this, the Dutch Parliament, in their wisdom, had received advice from the Dutch civil service that, yes, we should definitely bring in the laws, we should definitely bring in the sanctions, but could we perhaps remove the name Sergei Magnitsky from the legislation? There is one reason, and one reason only, why the Dutch civil service had made that case, and that reason is it really gets under Putin's skin when he sees that name, not just enshrined in law, but also, of course, broadcast all around the world. And I know that the promise that Bill Browder made to himself and to the memory of Sergei and to Sergei's family after his dismal death in that grim jail cell in Russia, the promise he made was that that name there tonight would never, ever be forgotten. And so it is that once again we find ourselves gathered here tonight to honor people who have made a contribution to fighting evil, to championing the underdog, to respecting and revering truth in the face of an epidemic of fake news, misdirection and misinformation. We will be making 6 awards this evening to 6 frankly remarkable individuals, some of whom cannot be with us tonight for political reasons, and some of whom cannot be with us tonight because they are no longer with us at all. And so I begin, if I may, by inviting to the stage a gentleman who will present tonight's award for an outstanding contribution to human rights law. He won it last year, so really needs little introduction, but let me tell you that Vladimir Kara-Murza is the vice chairman of the Open Russia movement. He was at risk of giving away the identity of the winner. He was a pallbearer at the winner's funeral earlier this year. He's a former deputy leader of the People's Freedom Party. He was a candidate for the Russian State Duma. He has testified before parliaments in Europe and North America, and he has been a key player in the passage of Magnitsky laws into the statute books of America, Canada, and several European Union countries. Like a handful of people in this room, he has first-hand experience of just how vile the tentacles of Putin's Kremlin can be. Twice, in 2015 and 2017, he was poisoned with an unknown substance and left in a coma. Twice, he recovered. The attempts on his life, I think this line is for the benefit of the lawyers present, were widely viewed as politically motivated. He remains a contributing writer to the Washington Post and has previously worked as a journalist for Russian broadcast and print media, as well as the New York Times. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage this evening Vladimir Kara-Murza.
Thank you very much, James, for a very kind introduction. Dear friends, dear Megan. Over the past several years, those of us involved in the global Magnitsky Justice campaign have been blessed with the opportunity to work with many political leaders across the globe who have shown that despite the stereotype, there is still room in politics for principle. But I can think of no one more deserving of tonight's recognition than Senator John McCain. Foresight and consistency are not the most frequent commodities in politics, especially when they're coupled with a commitment to always speak the truth, regardless of expediency. But then again, John McCain was not really a politician. He was a statesman, in the truest sense of this term. When it came to Russia, he always spoke loudly and clearly, both against the abuses of the Putin regime and against Western leaders who were all too eager to turn a blind eye. He first warned of Putin's coming authoritarianism in February of 2000, when most of the Western establishment was still enamored with this newcomer who spoke fluent German and said nice words about law and order. He first warned of Putin's coming attack on Ukraine 6 years before it happened. And when Bill Browder came to Washington to propose the idea of a law that would deny Kremlin crooks and human rights abusers the hospitality of Western democracies, and when Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov came to emphasize why this law was important as protection for Russian citizens, John McCain became the most committed and the most passionate supporter, not relenting until the day in December of 2012 when the Magnitsky Act became a reality. Among the biggest lies propagated by the Kremlin was the one about John McCain being an enemy of Russia. For them, the friends of Russia are those Western politicians who are willing to cut deals with our oppressors and trade their reputations for bonuses in directorships and Kremlin-controlled companies. John McCain was a true friend of Russia. He was a friend of the Russian people. Whether in a busy Senate session or in a time of recess when Washington goes quiet, we could always count on him to speak out for Russian political prisoners, to defend our rights to free elections and free assembly defied by our self-appointed rulers, to advocate for those threatened, harassed, or attacked for their political beliefs. Politics at its best is about making a difference. That difference can be in passing a law, in changing a policy, in securing an infrastructure project. For John McCain, the difference was in saving lives. I know this to be true for many activists and political prisoners around the world, but I can speak from first-hand experience. I know that I would not be standing here or anywhere tonight if he hadn't taken to the Senate floor last year to speak on my behalf when I could not say anything myself, lying in a coma after being poisoned in Moscow. International attention is the only protection in such cases, and he was always willing to walk that extra mile. No words can adequately express my gratitude. He wanted to save another life. The last time we met together, John McCain, Boris Nemtsov, and I, he pleaded with Boris not to return to Russia. He said he feared for his life. I have no choice. It is my country. I have to fight for it, Boris responded. This was January of 2014. Just over a year later, he was dead, gunned down on a bridge in the Kremlin's shadow. John McCain was heartbroken, but he never questioned why Boris made the decision to return. He understood better than anyone what it means to fight for a cause greater than oneself. It is thanks in very large part to Senator John McCain that the street in front of Russia's embassy in Washington now bears the name of Boris Nemtsov. There have only been 2 posthumous recognitions with this award. One for Boris Nemtsov, one tonight for John McCain. I know that they're watching us now as they continue that conversation unfinished in January of 2014. And for as long as I live, I will consider it the greatest privilege to have known and to have worked with these 2 men who personified courage, integrity, and honor. On behalf of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, I would like to present Meghan McCain with the 2018 Human Rights Award for her dad, a statesman, a patriot, and a freedom fighter, Senator John Sidney McCain, in recognition that his legacy will long continue to inspire all of those who are standing up for liberty and justice.
Thank you so much, Vladimir. Thank you all so much for having me here in London tonight. I'm really so happy to be surrounded by all of you. I can't tell you how nice it is to be among all of you tonight. Thank you so much for honoring my father with the Magnitsky Human Rights Award. In the long months since his passing, we have been blessed to receive so many accolades, so many tributes, so many remembrances for him and for his work. At the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., just 2 months back, the great eminences of American life gathered to honor him. Generals, admirals, congressmen, senators, presidents, all joined in the memory of my father, John McCain, with their own lives and legacies that were illuminated by his. The admiration of his nation and the gratitude of his country would have meant a great deal to my father. I know he saw it from the heavens, and I know it moved him as much as it moved me, my mother, and all those who loved him in his life. The praise of the mighty would have meant less to him, not because he was ungrateful, but because he understood the fleeting nature of power. And I suspect he would have been a bit worried to learn that for the first time, he was popular in Washington, D.C. Let me tell you what meant something to John McCain. Country meant something to him. A lifetime in service, from lowly midshipman to freshman ensign, to tenacious prisoner to elected servant, was testament enough to that. John McCain looked at the American flag and saw something more than a symbol, something more than patriotic pride. He saw a call of duty. Duty meant something to him. I reflect again and again as I think of my father's life, and he didn't need to do any of it. He was the son and grandson of great admirals and had no need to burnish the family name. He was a United States naval officer and had no need to volunteer for the dangers of aviation. He was a prisoner of an inventively brutal captor for long years and no need to resist and persist as he did. No one would have blamed him had he had broken. He was a war hero returning home to a good career and the promise of good money in the private sector, and he had no need to enter the tumult and frequent pain of public service. He was an old man with a loving family and a really beautiful ranch in Arizona, and he had no need to spend his final days, his last year of grace in life, rendering a last few services to America. He knew all this, but he also knew who he was. You all in here know who he was too, because you saw along with the rest of the world that duty defined him. But love also meant something to him. He was a ferocious foe of the things he opposed in life, whether the brutal regime of the Vietnamese communists, or the inequities of American politics, or the malignant spirit that warps patriotism into something dark and exclusionary. But his ferocity and his enmity were never functions of hate, never products of disdain, never outcomes of bitterness or loathing. John McCain loved so much and so well and so encompassingly that he could not have helped but stand against all that threatened the objects of his love. He loved his country. He loved his inheritance as an American. He loved his state. He loved his liberty, and he loved his family very much. I know because I was the privilege of my life to live in the warmth and comfort of his love. I saw what it drove him to do. I saw what sort of man it made him, and living up to that example and extending the same fighting love that he gave to me is the challenge that I take on for the rest of my life. Country, duty, love, these all meant something to John McCain, and there's something else that meant something to him, something that drew him across the great drama of his own life to a meeting many years ago with you, Bill Browder, to a determined sponsorship of legislation that honored the sacrifice of Sergei Magnitsky, to this award here tonight this evening, because justice meant something to my father, John McCain. There's something else John McCain had no need to do. He had no need to take note of all the injustices crowding the big wide world. He had no need to assume any responsibility for seeing memory preserved against faraway tyrannies, for seeing defiance acknowledged against the abuse of power, for seeing resistance sustained against an autocrat's might. Yet he did all of these things. He did it because his heart resounded to the call of justice. When Bill Browder walked into my father's office for a short meeting many years ago to tell the story of Sergei Magnitsky, and no doubt meet yet another prudential rejection, he walked into the office of a man who was the precise opposite of the dictator whose apparatus killed Sergei Magnitsky. Bill, I know you didn't know who John McCain was then when the meeting began, but you did by the end of the meeting. The world is a fine place and worth the fighting for, and I hate very much to leave it. This was my father's favorite quotes. He uttered it all the time. As Hemingway's Robert Jordan is preparing to fight and die at the close of For Whom the Bell Tolls. He really did believe it. He who lost his youth to the inhumane torments of the Hanoi Hilton looked upon the world more aware of its cruelties than anyone else and said to himself, "The world is a fine place." Nothing illustrates this more clearly than the gulf between John McCain and the man he enraged with his sponsorship of both the Magnitsky Act and the Global Magnitsky Act, the bloody-handed dictator of Russia, Vladimir Putin. John McCain suffered the world's worst, and he believed that the world was a fine place. Vladimir Putin lives in a palace, and he believes the world is a dark place. John McCain defended and vindicated the memory of ordinary men and women with integrity, like Sergei Magnitsky. Vladimir Putin has them murdered. John McCain was a strong man. Vladimir Putin is a weak man's idea of a strong man. John McCain on his death was remembered with gratitude and praised by the nation he served and loved. Vladimir Putin knows well that when the greatest risk to his own life is his own people, and that he will be remembered as a tyrant and a thief. John McCain went to his creator hopeful of mercy. Vladimir Putin will stand before God one day in dread of justice. It is typical of my father that he could not resist one final act from beyond the grave, reminding the lowly likes of Putin that truth and time are on the side of justice. A dictator does not rest easy unless the wholes of society bends to his will. This is his dreadful imperative and the source of his every excess. This is also his weakness, because he, armed with the whole array of worldly power and might, may be exposed and revealed by a single man, armed only with the truth. It might be a man like Sergei Magnitsky, who held fast to the truth, on the corruption that he uncovered, on the collusion between criminals and the favorites of the Russian state. He was killed for it. It might be a man like Boris Nemtsov, who warned the world again and again, over years and years, about the emerging nature of the Putin regime, who told us, if only we had listened, that the Russia was slipping back into a dictatorship more subtle and in some ways more potent than the Soviet Union. We must reflect for a moment on Nemtsov, who, like my father, could easily have chosen a path not strewn with danger and death. So many men in his position, most of them in fact, chose to be bought out by Putin and his state. The offer was open to Boris Nemtsov, too. Submit, be silent, and live well. Vladimir Putin, you see, does not demand total obedience from his subjects. He simply requires that they not speak the truth. Boris Nemtsov knew he could be prosperous and wealthy. He knew he could be safe. He knew that all it would take would to be acquiesce to one giant lie, that Vladimir Putin is good and good for Russia, and all the numberlessness, little lies subsidiary to it. No one would blame him if he had did. Nearly everyone else did. Nearly everyone else would. This is why my father admired Boris Nemtsov. Boris Nemtsov would not. In fact, Boris Nemtsov rejected the offer, rejected the opportunity to be part of the system, rejected the opportunity for safety, security, and wealth. Boris Nemtsov could not bear to part with the truth. Worse in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, and therefore infinitely better in the eyes of John McCain, Boris Nemtsov told the truth, openly, publicly, repeatedly. Putin tried jailing him, it didn't work. He tried restricting him, it didn't work. He tried harassing him, it didn't work. Nothing worked. So in the end, on the evening of February 27, 2015, Boris Nemtsov was shot 7 times at close range on the Bolshoi-Magnitsky bridge just below the walls of the Kremlin. As Vladimir brooded inside, the man who dared tell the truth about him died outside. It is important to understand what the death of Nemtsov was. It was a failure. It was a failure of Putin and his state, who could not, in over a decade of repression, figure out a way to silence and suppress this one man. Unable to persuade him, unable to buy him, unable to intimidate him, in the end, Vladimir Putin had to kill. Just 1 month before the murder, John McCain met with Boris Nemtsov in Vilnius on a territory still under Russian threat. There, the soon-to-be martyred man told my father this. You know, Senator, Putin really hates you. Do you know why he hates you, Senator? It's because he is afraid of you. And the reason he's afraid of you is that he knows deep down you will always stand by your principles, and that frightens him. Because unlike you, he is a man without principles. My father was absolutely delighted. Now that Boris is dead and my father is gone, their fight for freedom in Russia and around the world goes on. It is carried on by the men and women who see by their same lights and walk in their same paths. It is carried on by the likes of Vladimir Karamurza, right here. When they write the history of the restoration of Russian freedom, and they will, many names will come to the fore. They will be the names of the patriots and heroes who held fast to the belief and faith that Russians, too, deserve to exercise the God-given rights inherited in all men. Magnitsky, Nemtsov, and Karamurza. Vladimir Karamurza, too, could have opted for a safe and easy acquiescence to the tyranny of Vladimir Putin, yet Vladimir Karamurza, too, chose, like his friend Boris, to fight for truth instead. Like his friend Boris, Putin has tried to kill him twice. Both times, though, through providence and the intervention of men like my father, Vladimir Karamurza survived the assassination attempt sent against him from inside the Kremlin walls. It was a close-run thing, but thank God he lived, and still he fights. My father considered it an honor that Vladimir consented to be one of his pallbearers. There is no record of what Vladimir Putin thought. There is a myth these days that the world is entering a new era of strong men and autocrats, animated by a new nationalism that recaptures a glorious past and repackages it for a fraught future. It is a myth that enjoys adherents far beyond Russia, even as it is central to the Russian regime today. There are those, I am ashamed to say, even in America, who look at it and ask, what's so bad about it, and wonder why we can't have a bit of it for ourselves. My father would have been quick to answer this question tonight. Because it is a fraud, because we've seen it before and beat it every single time, and because we are Americans. How he enraged the tyrants and the small men, he knew it. He understood them, but they never understood him. They never understood a life of honor. They never understood a commitment to duty. They never understood a patriotism grounded in love. They never understood a humility that makes a man strong. John McCain was hated in palaces in Baghdad, in the dachas outside Moscow, in the fortresses in Pyongyang, in the dungeons in Hanoi, and in the compounds in Beijing, in the elite gatherings in Damascus and Tehran, and in every place where dictators and tyrants and oppressors gathered among themselves. This is where he was hated. This is also where he was loved. He was loved in every one of those same places, in Baghdad, in Moscow, in Pyongyang, in Hanoi, in Beijing, in Damascus, and Tehran, but not in the palaces. He was loved in the streets. The ordinary man and woman in every one of these places was and is born with the same inalienable God-given rights that John McCain was. In a time when too many Americans seem to believe that dignity, respect, and worth are due only to themselves, John McCain knew that the most humble fruit vendor, the most lowly peasant, the most despised outcast, and the most forgotten prisoner are all equally splendid and beloved in the sight of the Lord. John McCain didn't forget them. John McCain didn't forget Sergei Magnitsky. That's why they don't forget John McCain. They will remember him and honor him for years and years to come, but not for so many years to come, as their oppressors, their dictators, their mullahs, and their autocrats will hear his name and continue to shudder in fear. Bill, I want to tell you something here, and my father would agree. They're going to remember you too, in the exact same way. What greater measure is there in life of a life well lived than that? You've all gathered here to give my father the Magnitsky Human Rights Award, and it is an absolute honor here to accept it on his behalf. I began here by noting all the accolades and admiration my father has received since his passing, especially in Washington, D.C. I hope it is clear by now that this award this evening would have meant so much to him, as likely, maybe even a little bit more than others. My only sorrow is that he is not here to receive it himself. Every day without him is a day diminished by his absence and the diagnosis of his final illness. I used to count down the days I had left with him, and now I count down the days until I can see him again. I trust that I will, and when I do, he will be clothed in glory, with every tear wiped away, and with him will be the people that he loved and served, the oppressed of the earth, the simple people who never lost faith in God and freedom, despite the darkest dungeons, despite the cruelest tyrant. With him will be all whom he tried to free. With him will be all those whose sacrifice he honored. And with him will be all whose memory he kept alive. And with him, above all else, will be Sergei Magnitsky. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Meghan McCain. It's all right for you. You can all sit down now and reflect. I have to follow that astonishing encomium. Meghan, thank you. The next award this evening is for the Outstanding Investigative Journalist, and it is an award that spans the globe. As you will discover, so does the work of its recipient. To present the award tonight, I'd like to introduce you to Marcus Kolga. Marcus is himself an international award-winning documentary filmmaker. He is a political activist, a journalist, a leading Canadian expert on Russia and Central Eastern European issues. And it's his focus on communications and media strategies as tools of foreign policy and defense that makes him a particularly pertinent person to present this evening's award, which I have to tell you, without revealing who it is, I have come to the view in the last few years that the young man you are about to meet after Marcus invites him to the stage is truly rewriting the rules of journalism. Quietly, consistently, and with quite breathtaking results. And any other journalists in the room will know just how much it hurts a journalist to admit that about somebody else. Marcus is also a Canadian advisor to the Interparliamentary Group for Justice for Sergei Magnitsky and a long-standing supporter in getting that act passed into Canadian law. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Marcus Kolga.
Thank you, ladies, gentlemen, friends. In this era where facts and truth are among the leading victims of the Kremlin's information war against our democracies, our societies, the work of journalists has never been more crucial than it is today. Among the most important are the fact checkers and investigative journalists who expose the corruption, human rights violations, disinformation, and lies of regimes who steal, torture, and kill with impunity. The groundbreaking work of Bellingcat, an international citizen-based investigative journalism platform, and its founder, Elliot Higgins, have heroically exposed the truth behind mass human rights violations and acts of terror committed or sponsored by the Kremlin and its allies. Using open source information, videos, satellite maps, and images, Elliot and his team at Bellingcat revealed that a Russian ground-to-air missile was used in 2014 by Kremlin-sponsored terrorists in eastern Ukraine to shoot down a civilian airliner, Malaysian Airlines MH17, with 293 people on board. Without Bellingcat's reporting, awareness about the Syrian regime's monstrous use of chemical weapons and other atrocities against its civilian population would remain otherwise completely unknown and shrouded by the lies of Syrian and Russian state media. Most recently, Bellingcat discovered the identities of GRU assassins dispatched by Vladimir Putin to this country to poison Sergei Skripal with a deadly military-grade nerve agent, leaving one civilian dead. In the process of identifying the agents, Bellingcat thankfully exposed much of the GRU's operations and tactics, protecting the integrity of our collective security and the lives of other whistleblowers, activists, and critics of Vladimir Putin. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an incredible honor for me to present the 2018 Magnitsky Award for Investigative Journalism to award-winning investigative journalist Elliot Higgins, founder of Bellingcat.
Thank you very much. People often ask me where the name Bellingcat comes from. It's from a fable. It's about a group of mice who were very terrified of a cat. It was a large and ferocious cat. And they came up with they had a meeting, a little mouse meeting. They all came together. And they came up with an idea, put a bell around the cat's neck. But they then realized they didn't have a plan to do that. So at Bellingcat, we're teaching the mice how to bell the cat. And it's the mice I would like to accept the award on today. And the mice are the community that's grown up around the work of Bellingcat, who contribute in small ways and big. Often we think about Twitter as being a cesspool of arguments, anger, racism, but there's a community that's grown up around the work of Bellingcat that have contributed in so many ways to the work that we're doing. The mention earlier of the Ukrainian buck, or the Russian buck we found in Ukraine that shot down MH17, that was one person on Twitter who made an observation that we looked into, and it allowed us to piece together all this evidence that we could use to prove it. When Russia started bombing Syria, it was a small group of people on Twitter who started finding out where those bombings were happening, proving Russia was lying about bombing ISIS repeatedly. And most recently, we've been working on projects where we've helped the mice and got them involved with these different ideas. Europol's Trace an Object, Stop Child Abuser campaign, where they took images from child abuse imagery, small objects, and asked the public to identify them. We used our network, we amplify that message, and around 70% of those objects have been identified in these child abuse cases. So it's the great work of not only Bellingcat, but the amazing work of those people who follow Bellingcat's work, who contribute in every way, big and small, that I'm accepting this award for tonight. Thank you.
I would urge you to have a look at the work that Bellingcat does, and particularly to check out the workshops that Elliot and his colleagues now run, because with just 3 days training, you too could be a mouse. It is time now to introduce the gentleman who will present this evening's award for the Outstanding Russian Opposition Activist. And it's hard to think of 3 words that are more euphemistic, isn't it, on the globe at the moment than Russian opposition activist. These are, by definition, men and women who take their life in their hands every single day. The gentleman who is to present the award this evening is someone who knows much about risk. Thor Halvorsen is a human rights advocate and film producer. He runs what is best regarded perhaps as the Davos of human rights. He also contributes to the fields of public policy, public interest advocacy, individual rights, civil liberties, and pro-democracy advocacy. It is, though, the Human Rights Foundation, the Davos of human rights, for which he remains best known, devoted to liberating political prisoners and to promoting civil and political rights around the world. The CEO of the Oslo Freedom Forum, and described by the New York Times as a champion of the underdog and the powerless. Before I invite him to the stage, I should briefly let you know that if you go to Bill Browder's Twitter account, there is a link for a live feed on Facebook for this evening's events, which obviously I should have mentioned earlier. Forgive me. Also, hashtag Magnitsky Awards will generate some chatter on social media. Before that, though, please join me in welcoming to the stage a gentleman who has already won the best dressed man, not just in this room tonight, but in the whole of London. Ladies and gentlemen, Thor Halvorsen.
You know, I have to begin by saying I don't see why, when celebrating something, people have to look like they're going to a funeral, because really, honestly, we're celebrating this evening. And you know, there are so many different kind of awards and different kind of events where people get recognized for things. What a thrill and an honor to be at an event and to be in a position to present an award for human rights. So I begin just by saying how grateful I am to Bill for allowing me to do this. Sergei Magnitsky was one of the bravest people on earth. We know him by his actions as a person who committed his life to fighting corruption. His legacy is one of justice, freedom, and accountability. And these 3 concepts, they perfectly capture the introduction of what can be said about Alexei Navalny, a blogger, human rights defender, activist, and a restless organizer. And likely, like Bill Browder and some of the folks here, one of the most feared adversaries to the Kremlin regime. And the single individual that has inspired millions and millions of Russians in their belief that perhaps their country is not doomed to live in autocracy and corruption forever. I could stand here and talk about the cases that Navalny has exposed when discussing corruption. Perhaps I should mention the gerrymandering that Putin's regime has carried out in order to prevent a growingly popular Alexei Navalny from running in elections. Perhaps I should mention the number of times when this amazingly brave young man has been arrested, detained, and prosecuted. Several dozen times, if I'm not wrong. What makes Navalny effective is what he speaks about, the way he speaks, and to whom he speaks. What does he address? Corruption. It is said that in every state of the world, there is a secret police and there is a mafia. But in the case of Russia, the mafia and the secret police have a state. Funny from a distance, not so funny if you're fighting that state. And this state is one that engages in constant 24-hour propaganda, brainwashing the Russians into believing that they must live under a czarist regime. This is the natural thing for Russians. They need a strong man. This is perfectly normal in Russia. But you see, they haven't been able to do the propaganda to also convince the Russian population that corruption is perfectly acceptable and you should be perfectly comfortable that the oligarchs and the people in government get rich while you suffer. So that is the chord that Navalny has been able to strike so effectively, and a chord that echoes all over Russian society. Who is listening to Navalny? Millennials. Young, clever, educated people who seem immune to that propaganda, who were not born during the Soviet period, people who do not see the West as a boogeyman, the generation that is coming, the best human capital that Russia has today. That is who Navalny speaks to. And how does he say it? He says it in a lighthearted and easy way. He doesn't take himself too seriously. It's never about him. It's not about Alexei Navalny. It's about his growing movement. This is a man who tweets encouraging messages to his supporters while he is in a police car being driven away. He's witty, he's funny, and every time he comes out of jail, which happens to be quite regularly, he uses humor and he challenges the omnipotent dictatorship with a smile on his face. Dictators know how to deal with anger from the population. They crush it. They know how to deal with fear. They feed it. They know that they like to swim in a river of apathy where nobody really is going to do anything about things. The one thing they cannot counter, the one thing they cannot fight against is humor and a positive human spirit, courage, and leading by example with a smile on your face. Alexei is not here. His longtime friend, Vladimir Ashurkov, who lives here in London in exile, is going to be collecting the award for him. In order to support Alexei Navalny, on behalf of the prize committee of the Sergei Magnitsky Awards, please help me celebrate Alexei Navalny.
Thank you, Tor, for this wonderful introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to accept this award today on behalf of Alexei Navalny. Throughout his life in civil activism and politics, he is always fighting for the rule of law in Russia against oppression and violation of human rights. For him and the team that has assembled around him, the values of human dignity and perseverance, which are exemplified by Sergei Magnitsky, are dear to our hearts. Sergei Magnitsky advocated a transparent and accountable government and paid for this with his life. Unfortunately, in today's Russia, this is the price that is too often paid for what should come as a given in a fair society. Alexei Navalny and his teammates are also subject to immense pressure and unlawful persecution as a result of their activities. It's symbolic that today the European Court of Human Rights announced a long-awaited ruling on Navalny's case. The Grand Chamber of the court ruled that his arrest in 2012 and to 2014, including a year spent under house arrest, were politically motivated. The last time such motivation was determined by the European Court of Human Rights in a Russian case was in 2004. This is an important precedent for many political activists in Russia who are regularly detained during mass protests. For now, we can expect justice in such cases only in international courts. However, I'm confident that sooner rather than later, this situation will change and rule of law will gradually prevail in Russian legal system. Alexei Navalny is making an enormous contribution to this struggle while risking his liberty and life itself, and this award is an important recognition of this fact. As Alexei could not be here today, he asked me to read his address to you that he had prepared. Dear ladies and gentlemen, when I first heard about Sergei Magnitsky, a lawyer who was illegally arrested and was subject to torturous conditions in prison, I thought that he was going to be released fairly soon, that they would scare him and then he would be released. But he was not released, and in 11 months, Sergei died in prison. In fact, he was murdered. From that moment on, every time I hear Sergei Magnitsky's name, it comes as a reminder that any indulgence in relation to human rights or any suggestion that a situation may get better by itself or by oppressors' goodwill would be a wishful thinking and will cost the life of an innocent person. It is a great pride and honor for me to receive the Sergei Magnitsky Award. As Sergei proved with his life the point which I try to deliver daily to the people, that corruption is not a harmless white-collar crime. Corruption is always ultimately linked to much more severe and cruel crimes. Behind any sophisticated bureaucrat who steals money using his pen, there will be a corrupt police officer handcuffing everyone who comes as an annoying obstacle to the said bureaucrat with a pen. The fight against corruption in Russia sometimes looks like a utopia because corruption is a core for Putin to stay in power. My colleagues and I are inspired by support of hundreds of thousands of people who, despite the intimidation, propaganda, and cultivated indifference, believe in a better future. And I have no doubt that Russia will be able to become a proper European state, and corruption will soon be turned from bureaucrats' valor into an object of criminal persecution. I want to thank you for extending me the award, and I would like to dedicate this award to all the wonderful people who support our movement all over Russia. Alexei Navalny. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is time now to present the award for the outstanding lawyers in the field of human rights activism, and somewhat fortuitously, given that time is moving rather faster than we expected, the gentleman preparing to present this award needs no introduction at all. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Browder.
In the last 2 years before this, when we had the Magnitsky Awards, I actually never presented an award because there were so many good people to present the awards and so many good recipients. But this particular award, I didn't want to leave to anybody else because I feel so strongly about it, and I feel so strongly about the recipients. And this award started from an email that I got. I published my book, Red Notice, in 2015, and I set up an email account so people could write to me, and I got various people wrote to me writing nice notes, and a few people wrote to me with mean notes. And every once in a while, someone would come to me with a story, and I received a note from a woman, a Russian woman in Guatemala, named Irina Bitkov. And Irina Bitkov wrote to me a story that was so shocking that I couldn't help but pay attention. She and her husband and their daughter lived in St. Petersburg. They owned a pulp and paper mill in St. Petersburg. And one day the Russian FSB came to them and said, "We want you to hand over your pulp and paper mill." And they refused. And their daughter, who was 16 at the time, was subsequently kidnapped, raped for 3 days, and then returned to the family completely destroyed. They came back, the FSB, to the family and said, "Okay, now hand over your pulp and paper mill. And eventually the FSB got their pulp and paper mill and threatened the family with death. And they fled, first to Latvia, then to Turkey. And then they discovered that Guatemala didn't have an extradition treaty with Russia, and there was a law firm in Guatemala offering to emigrate there. And so they paid this law firm some money, emigrated to Guatemala, got their papers, and settled into a quiet life in Guatemala. The father became a math teacher, the mother became a drawing teacher, and their daughter, who was severely psychologically traumatized, started to slowly recover. In Guatemala, they had another child, a little boy named Igor, and their life pretty much seemed perfect, or as perfect as it can be in exile. And then 5 years later, the Russians tracked them down. The Russians tracked them down, and they got an international organization that was supposed to be fighting impunity in Guatemala to arrest the family, put them in prison, and they sentenced the father to 19 years in prison for passport violations, and the mother and daughter to 14 years. And then they put the 3-year-old child into a Guatemalan orphanage. And they had, the Bitkoffs were lucky enough to have 2 lawyers. One of them, Victoria Sandoval, was their neighbor in their area. And the other, Rolando Oliveira, was their media lawyer. And these 2 lawyers, who weren't experts in criminal law, that weren't experts in human rights, took on their case. And not only took on their case, Rolando took their son, Igor, their 3-year-old son, into his own family to take care of him while they were in jail. They took on their case fighting the most evil, I would say, corrupt group of government officials. They were threatened, they are threatened, and they slowly fought for the justice for this family. And I joined their fight for this justice, and I'm proud to say that through their incredible hard work, giving up almost everything, traveling the world, testifying in Washington, not being paid, looking after their child, the family was let out of jail a few months ago. And I've seen lawyers, and I've never seen the kind of commitment and the kind of sacrifice that these 2 lawyers have made for this family, and it touches me dearly, and I want them to be recognized and honored. And please come up so you can have your award.
Thank you very much. For me, it's an incredible honor. Your words, Bill, are so touching. It's an honor to be present, to have been invited to this important ceremony. And I would like to share with you a few words of what we have, the experience that I have had with the Bitkoffs. I met the Bitkoffs because, well, in fact, yes, we were neighbors, and also because we have kids the same age. So Irina and I took our babies to the same kindergarten, and that's how we started a friendship. One morning on January 2015, their house was being raided for about 100 officials from CICIG and FESI, which is like the prosecutors of high-risk cases. And after almost 24 hours of raid, they have not eaten, they have not slept in all that time. They were arrested and they were driven to the courthouse where they were locked in cages in the basement of the courthouse at the view of every person that entered the courthouse. They were humiliated, they were stripped of all hope and dignity. They were tortured. They were locked alongside rapists, killers, murderers, gang members. And because of the inhuman treatment that Anastasia had suffered before, as Bill Browder said, and the inhuman treatment, the torture that she had suffered during the raid under arrest, she suffered a terrible breakdown. And Irina had no other option but lay her down at the dirty floor of the basement of the courthouse with no medical treatment whatsoever for more than 5 days. Their son, Vladimir, he was 3 years old at the time. He was taken from them. And I cannot imagine the terrible pain it meant for him and for his parents. The Vitkovs were alone in Guatemala. They have no family resources over there. And they were surrendered by opportunistic lawyers that only saw them as easy prey because they thought that they were going to be soon deported to Russia. Thankfully, it didn't happen. The press exposed the case as picturing them as the leaders of a smuggler's structure that was very dangerous, and that had the effect that many of the people, neighbors, friends, left them alone, thinking they were terrible people like the Russian mafia or something. This case has led me to know how far can human evilness and the ambition that feeds it can go. It is almost impossible not to feel powerless facing the power of all this vileness and how it goes over the law. But it is also impossible not to fight for justice, for this family, to see them free again. This award, which I am very honored to receive today, is a great incentive to continue this fight. And I appreciate the support we have received from Bill Browder, from Ivan Cherkasov, from John Love, with whom we have spent hour and hour trying to find a solution for all this. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Vladimir Vitkov was only 3 years old when he came to my home in January 2015. At such a young age, and with every member of his family in prison, he said to me, "I am worried." On February 2015, I took him to the prison where his father was being held so they could see each other. They were having breakfast together when Vladimir stopped eating, looked into his father's eyes, and again said, "I am worried." 2 days after that, A judge took him away of my custody and sent him to an orphanage outside the city. This judge also forbade having any contact with him. His family was in great suffering during this time, and I can't even imagine what Vladimir felt being separated from everyone he knew. When he was released after 42 days in the orphanage, he was sick and visibly hurt. One night, Vladimir told me, "Rolando, a red wolf comes to my bed every night and tries to take me away, but an angel comes and rescues me." Everything that has happened to the Vitko family has been a human tragedy. And it didn't take me long to realize that our struggle was not only Guatemala's corrupt justice system, but also against the biggest criminal organization in the world. If you asked me at that time if I was scared, I would say I was terrified, concerned, and even hopeless. But the angel from Vladimir's dreams did come to help us in the end. This angel was sent by God, and he is called Bill Browder. Bill Browder, with help from his amazing team, Ivan Cherkasov and John Lowe, among others, worked very hard on this case and was willing to fight for justice no matter what. That gave me hope, and today it is a great privilege to be here and receive this award in honor of Sergei Magnitsky, whose fight for the rule of law persists and has spread globally. On behalf of my country, my family, the members of the Vitko family, I am thankful to every person in the world who fights in defense of the human rights. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next award this evening is for the outstanding human rights activist. And certainly for the first time in my experience, the gentleman poised to deliver it has reserved the right to edit the biographical notes that I was given by Bill's office on the perfectly reasonable grounds that he thought his own office might have submitted false information designed to embarrass him in front of all of you. So I can say with some authority that Emanuelis Zingeris is a former member of the democracy movement in Lithuania. He is a politician currently serving as a member of the Seimas. He is a former chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee since 2010, a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe since 1993, a member of the board of the Boris Nemtsov Foundation for Freedom, and also a rapporteur for the investigations into the offences committed against Boris Nemtsov, and also the gentleman who is the winner of this award this evening. Am I getting all this right, Emanuelis? Am I getting? Yeah, I'm getting good. I'm glad to hear it. He is, of course, also that rapporteur role involves his membership of the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly in Strasbourg. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Emanuelis Zingeris.
Thank you, James, for your sense of humor. I think Bill Browder was greatly awarded by the speech of President Putin in Helsinki. And the speech, for about 3-minute speech after negotiations between President Trump and President Putin, and the main topic after that of the press conference was Bill Browder. So, and speech was overbooked with hatred, and Bill Browder deserved the speech. I think now we know surely who will be behind every act of terror against you. Bill, so it was testimony in Helsinki, and every intelligence and security service should be in the West should be aware about that. I am here, remembering the 90s, when we started, our in German it's Wendezeit. I don't know. It's in English. It will be the time when we turn away from communist regime in the Baltic. It was easy to do that. Well, we remember our success story before Second World War, having our statehood in the 1980s, fighting successfully 5 countries, Finland, Poland, Baltic states, against communist regimes, and having our independence against until Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Remember Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin, who stood in front of me and he told me, Emmanuel, I was in negotiation team for independence from our side, let's build democracy together. You see the crowd on Manezhnaya Ploshchad, hundreds of thousands with the posters, independence and freedom for the Baltic. You see how many Russian Democrats we have in the streets. Having my Jewish sense of survival, I told him carefully, Boris Nikolaevich, let's build democracy separately. And after 28 years, just a year before Christmas 2018, we're now having few brave guys who continue in the spirit of Magnitsky, like Vladimir Karamurza, like Mr. Navalny, who continue their fight for future possible democracy in Russia. Remembering Boris Nemtsov after my calls, and he went to Kiev and stood bravely telling Russian Democrats together with Ukrainian Democrats in the Maidan in favor of democracy, in favor of democratic Ukraine, in favor of the future of Russia, democratic Russia. And now we are ending with the story when we try to use my not exactly Oxford English, trying to tell to President Putin, even with your declared world war against democracy and freedom, you will not succeed in destructing our love for Russian people and their desire to build democracy in Russia in the future, and do not to unleash your secret services against Democrats around the world. And now I have in front of me the letter from Polar Kreis. It's about, James, it's about 11,000 kilometers from here, probably. From a concentration camp, most terrible place in Russia. Never sun appears. And if you allow me, I will be using your nerves. You have iron nerves here in Britain. I just saw your discussions in Parliament today. And I assure you that there will be no Brexit, at least among Democrats in the world and among the human rights fighters. So I would like to say that Bill Browder received a letter from Oleg Sentsov, proud, intelligent man, captive from the moment when he was captured and deported from illegally annexed Crimea, illegally annexed territory. And he was under pressure to impose on him foreign Russian citizenship. And he was tortured. And becoming a reporter and going to the details, I would like to read his letter. I don't know how to deal, Bill and James. I have letter in 2 languages, in a very short letter, in Russian and in English. If you allow me, having such serious relations to Russian heritage, the real Russian heritage, and their culture, allow me to read that in Russian first. Well, we have here a great representative of Russian democratic world, and done in English, in very short way. Уважаемые белые коллеги, я благодарен вам за то, что вы присудили мне столь почетную награду, названную именем человека, отдавшего свою жизнь за правду и свободу. Мне нечего сказать по этому поводу. Любое количество произнесенных слов о свободе не стоит одного поступка, направленного на ее реальные достижения. Я стараюсь меньше говорить и больше делать, чего желаю и всем вам, и остальным людям. Вся ирония этой ситуации стоит в том, что я одновременно с известием об этой награде я вынужден был прекратить голодовку. Но это не означает, что я сдался. Меня можно отбросить, но победить меня не получится. С наилучшими пожеланиями, Олег Сенцов. Dear Bill and dear colleagues, I am so grateful to you all for bestowing on me such an honorable award, especially one that carries the name of a person who gave his life for truth and freedom. I feel that there is not much to say on this occasion, when constant meaningful action speaks louder than words. I try to talk less and do more, which I wish you all. The irony of the situation is that upon being informed of my nomination for this award, I was forced to stop my hunger strike. Hunger strike is more like 140 days. But it does not mean that I give up in my fight. I can be discarded and ignored for a while, but it cannot be defeated. With all best wishes to you, respectfully, Oleg Sentsov. I would like to say that all those resolutions done by me and by my colleagues in Council of Europe, Strasbourg Parliamentary Assembly, was voted in favor by all parties presenting Europe, including British members of Parliament. So all chamber voted in favor. You have here everything, all points after tortures, annihilation of the people involving intelligence from Kremlin side. And on the end, when Emmanuel Macron, when every leader of the world, the European Union, tried to ask Mr. Putin to release this gentleman, is still in prison, in most terrible place. And I think, Bill, it was a great decision from you to remember him and his fight for Ukrainian freedom, for Ukrainian possible integration to the free Western society. And I'm very proud that behind we have not only Democrats, but the people from Baltic countries who were, and Lithuanian youth who were so successful building our democracy last 27 years, and we are finally under NATO and Union roof and we are safe. So thank you so much, and Bill, be sure your choice was most important for us to remember fighting people inside of Russia who still create a hope that Russia will be democracy and will be stopped to act and will be joining us in the world of the democracy and civilized norms. Thank you so much.
Emanuelis, thank you so much. I may share very briefly with you a moment I was privileged to witness earlier when Emanuelis told Meghan McCain that they are planning in Vilnius an exhibition and to name a square after her late father, which came as complete news to Meghan, which I think is a mark of, while we concentrate on the big ticket events, the huge stories and the important acts and interventions that have been carried out by Bill and his friends and colleagues around the world, it's also because of his work and his networks that smaller stories like that, which I presume will touch everybody in this room, are also unfolding unnoticed all around us. Emanuelis, thank you once more. It's time now for the final award of this evening, and the gentleman who will be presenting this award, he features in Bill's book, which you heard him mention earlier. He reminded you it's called Red Notice and resisted the urge to add that it's available from all good bookshops. So I'll do that on his behalf. There is, at risk of a spoiler, there is a chapter in it called Kyle's War, and the star or the hero of that chapter is Kyle Parker. He's the Chief of Staff of America's Helsinki Commission. He served on the House Foreign Affairs Committee as a ranking member. Elliot Engel's senior advisor overseeing US foreign policy towards the 50 countries and 3 international organizations covered by the State Department's Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. Before entering government, he spent 8 years at the American Foreign Policy Council managing political exchanges with Russia, Ukraine, and China, which is perhaps why the aims and ambitions of the Magnitsky Act chimed with him so profoundly that he dedicated himself to promoting that landmark law, redefining human rights advocacy all around the world. He also speaks fluent Russian, although whether he chooses to follow Emanuelis' example and deliver some of his speech from the stage in that language, we will have to wait and see. Ladies and gentlemen, Kyle Parker.
Спасибо, Джеймс, за ваши добрые слова. Но я буду говорить по-английски, поскольку я намного легче на своем родном языке. And thank you, Bill, most importantly for your friendship over these past 10 years since we first met in Washington, and you first told me the story of a young Russian lawyer who was at the time being subjected to increasingly torturous conditions in Russia's infamous pretrial detention system. And also, Bill, for this honor tonight of presenting a Magnitsky Award to someone whom I've long admired and only just tonight had the pleasure of meeting in person. Her name is Zoya Tsvetova of Russia. And thank you to Natalia Nikolaevna, Sergei's mother, for raising a son whose decency, integrity, and courage has inspired the whole world and given hope to so many, especially to those unjustly imprisoned. No less an authority than God himself has commanded us to visit and to comfort those in prison. And God makes no distinction between those who are justly or unjustly confined. They are our brothers and our sisters, and they have rights. In Russia, under the authoritarian rule of Vladimir Putin, the the prisoner, has had no better advocate than Zoya Tsvetova, whose work has improved the quality of care the Russian state is bound by its own laws, by international norms, and by the basic principles of morality to provide. Zoya's tireless efforts on behalf of those the state has justly and unjustly deprived of their physical liberty are best known to me through her leadership in producing a 2009 report for the Commission for Human Rights Observance in Moscow detention centers. This report, of course, examined the circumstances surrounding Sergei Leonidovich Magnitsky's death in Moscow's Matrosskaya Tishina. And this report is now cited in the US Federal Code and in our Department of Treasury's regulations on how to apply the law that bears Sergei's name. This alone is more than enough to make Zoya a worthy recipient of tonight's award. But Zoya is also a journalist in a country where many of her colleagues have been intimidated into silence, forced into exile, and even murdered. Zoya, with your pen, you serve as a conduit for nothing less than political reality itself to Russian society. You have also defended Sergei's heroic legacy against those who, even after his death, seek to further injure his family, friends, and ultimately Russia, the country he loved till the end. Zoya, you know from your own family's experience of false imprisonment in the Soviet era, and from that of many of your contemporaries, that the risks you face are too real. And yet you continue to put the good of your fellow citizens above that of your own comfort and safety. This fact is a greater measure of your character than any words I can summon in your praise. Thank you, Zoya, for reminding us all that we can never do enough for those whose only hope may be that we raise our voices or take up our pens, our journalistic pens, our legislative pens, in their defense.
Добрый вечер. Уважаемые дамы и господа, я никогда не видела Сергея Магнитского, никогда не была с ним знакома. Но 16 ноября 2016 года, ровно 9 лет назад, я прочитала в газете «Ведомости» о его гибели. Я тогда была посетителем московских тюрем, и уже несколько месяцев вместе с коллегами мы ходили по московским тюрьмам. Как только мы услышали об этом, мы побежали в Бутырскую тюрьму, чтобы узнать подробности гибели Сергея.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have never had an opportunity to know Sergei Magnitsky personally while he was alive. I never met him or spoke with him. 9 years ago, 16th of November 2016, I read an article in the newspaper Ведомости about his death. At that time, I was a member of the Moscow Civil Oversight Prison Commission, and for the several months had been visiting people held in prison. Once we learned about his death, my colleagues and I ran to the Butyrka prison to find out more on Sergei's death.
Потом были долгие разговоры с тюремщиками, с врачами, с сокамерниками Сергея. Все они врали, и никто не говорил о том, как погиб Сергей в тюрьме. Потом мы долго говорили с его мамой, с его тетей, с его женой, с друзьями. И тогда я узнала, каким он был потрясающим человеком, каким он был честным, бескомпромиссным и порядочным. Сегодня мне очень стыдно, что мы, посетители тюрем, не знали о том, как Сергея мучили в тюрьме, что мы не знали об этом и не смогли ни помочь ему, ни спасти его.
Afterwards, there were a lot of conversation with prison officials, guards, doctors, and Sergei's cellmates. There were a lot of lies, and none of them told us how Sergei died. Then there was a lot of conversation with Sergei's mom, auntie, and friends, and I learned what an amazing person Sergei was, honest, uncompromising, and a decent human being. I was ashamed that we, members of the Oversight Prison Commission, didn't know that he had tortured in prison, in Butyrka prison, and that we didn't help him at that time.
За эти годы я написала десятки статей о деле Сергея Магнитского. Сегодня я уверена, что Сергея Магнитского в тюрьме убили. И, вероятно, это было умышленное убийство, санкционированное на самом высоком уровне. Иначе почему к ответственности не были привлечены никто, ни тюремные врачи, ни тюремщики? Нет ни одного официального виновного в смерти Сергея.
Over the years, I have written dozens of articles about Sergei Magnitsky case. I'm certain that Sergei was murdered and that it was sanctioned at the highest level. Otherwise, why hadn't a single prison official or a prison doctor has been brought to justice?
Благодаря акту Магнитского в российских тюрьмах, и в частности в Бутырке, были улучшены условия содержания. Мы знаем, что сегодня тюремщики и следователи боятся, что они могут попасть в список Магнитского. Смертей в тюрьмах стало меньше, но тем не менее мы знаем случаи, когда заключенные погибают так же трагически, как погиб Сергей Магнитский.
Thanks to the Magnitsky Act, detention conditions in Russian prison, and in particular in Butyrka prison, have been improved significantly. And today, the prison official and investigators are afraid to do anything which may put them into the Magnitsky sanction list. The number of deaths in prison have since been substantially reduced, but nevertheless, we do know cases where detainees died.
Премия Сергея Магнитского для меня – это большая честь, это чрезвычайно важно. Но эта премия не только мне. Это премия всем тем людям в России, всем тем журналистам, которые говорят и пишут о Сергее и о российском ГУЛАГе. Я хочу сказать, что эта премия и театру ДОК, и режиссерам Елене Гремину и Михаилу Угарову. Они авторы документального спектакля «Час 18». Это спектакль о том, как Магнитского убивали в тюрьме. Гремина и Угаров один за другим умерли весной этого года. Это премия и журналу «Нью Таймс», в котором печатали очень много статей о Сергее Магнитском. Это премия и сайту МБХ Медиа, на котором я писала свои статьи о Сергее Магнитском. Я очень надеюсь, что когда-нибудь мы узнаем имена убийц и заказчиков убийства Сергея. Эти люди будут наказаны. И справедливость для Сергея Магнитского наступит не на бумаге, а на деле.
The Sergei Magnitsky award is extremely important to me. This award is not only for me, it is for all those people who continue to be outspoken about Sergei case and the Russian gulags. The award belongs also to a Docs Theater and its directors Elena Gremina and Mikhail Ugarov, directors and producers of a documentary play 1 hour and 18 minutes, which pieces together the final hours of Sergei's life. Both Gremina and Michael Ugarov unfortunately passed away one after another this spring. It is also award belongs to MBH Media and New Times Journal, who wrote a lot of articles about Sergei case. I do keep my hope that one day we will know the name of Sergei murderers and their puppeteers, and that there will be all of them be brought to justice. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this evening's awards. All that remains is for me to ask you to join me in inviting back to the stage our host this evening, the immovable force behind the proper commemoration of and the continuing fight for justice for Sergei Magnitsky. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Browder.
Well, I am very moved by all of these stories, and I hope that you are as well. As I said at the very beginning, having all of us here, all of us justice fighters here together, makes us feel a little bit less alone when we're fighting evil in the world. One thing I wanted to say is that we have spent the last 3 years focusing specifically on heroes fighting impunity and evil in Russia. And one of the things which has happened is that in 2016, the Magnitsky Act, which was just a Russian piece of legislation, became the Global Magnitsky Act. It became the Global Magnitsky Act in America, it's the Global Magnitsky Act in Canada, the Global Magnitsky Act in the United Kingdom, in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And so starting next year, we're not just going to honor Russian heroes, but in the spirit of the Global Magnitsky Act, we're going to honor heroes from around the world. And so I invite all of our friends and colleagues and allies to share those stories with us over the next year so we can have other great heroes stand up here and be recognized for their contribution and their bravery and their sacrifice. Thank you very much.